Welcome back. The Nifty is hovering around 24,700 after that volatility that we saw about 1 hour back. Things seem to have stabilized over the last 30 minutes, just mildly lower on the benchmark indices. Ashi Anand from IME Capital is now joining in to talk about the markets, individual stocks and themes that he likes right now. Ashish, the big story that's dominating headlines is the GST reform. So based on what we've seen and heard so far, have you made any changes to your portfolio?
Yeah, hi. Firstly, thanks for having me on the show. The GST reform is actually quite interesting, and it does kind of change, I think, the sectoral and market outlooks a bit, because it's not just the GST reform. You have to look at the GST reform in conjunction with the fact that there was a decent kind of stimulus coming in terms of income tax cuts earlier in the year. And you've also had kind of a cut in interest rates. Now, a combination of these three together does actually lay the foundation for a consumption recovery. This is consumption as a sector has actually been kind of fairly muted over the past couple of years. You first had continued weakness in rural. This was followed by kind of weakness kind of creeping into urban consumption as well. Now, with all three of these kind of coming together, I think we are fairly well poised for a recovery in consumption as we go into the second half of this year. And given the fact that a number of these companies have been actually laggards in terms of stock performances, there is kind of a space for consumption to actually start to participate and also kind of be a driver of the markets going forward. So consumption is a space that we have been increasing exposures to a bit. But it is important to just kind of understand that it's not that valuations of the high quality franchises are still very attractive. Room for substantial valuation re-rating is fairly limited. So you are going to be dependent on earnings growth. And we really have to see how much these various measures kind of come together to kind of propel consumption as we go into the second half of this year.
So when you're talking about how much it really reflects into consumption, Ashi, some of the sectors or specific stocks that you think will benefit the most if these cuts are actually passed along?
Yeah, sure. So, firstly, at one level, I think we've been very positive on pure play digital companies. It is important to understand that a lot of these are actually direct beneficiaries of kind of consumption growth. A lot of our digital companies in our portfolio do actually benefit from this. That said, in terms of other sectors, you clearly have kind of consumer durables being a fairly large kind of a winner here, because these are larger ticket kind of consumption items, and consumer durables along with auto clearly are big beneficiaries. Auto is a space that we are not as bullish on from a longer term perspective, primarily because we aren't very clear in terms of the EV transition risk, how that will actually impact longer term market shares and profitability in the sector, and which is why it's a space we've been quite cautious about. But I think consumer durables is clearly quite interesting. FMCG is another space that certain segments have actually clearly benefiting from that 18% to 5% reduction. And that again is a space that could you are likely to kind of see a bounce back of volume growth, because this will kind of reduce prices for the consumer. Largely consumer-oriented insurance on the margin will be slightly positive. But I think it's really the whole auto, consumer durable, and kind of the FMCG pack that we're really focusing on in terms of the GST reforms.
You know, Ashi, call me being the devil's advocate here, but 2 points that you mentioned, we were not so bullish on the auto space because of the uncertainties around the EV transition, but the companies are still making or increasing their EV exposure as a part of their portfolio, or something on those lines, and the EV adoption is increasing in India in comparison to a lot of other countries. That's point one. And point two being the fact that, yeah, daily essentials, yes, the GST rate cuts could act as a benefit, but for consumer durable names, we are entering into a seasonally weak period as well. So does a GST rate cut necessarily translate into increased demand? Because that is something that you would want to see on the ground first as well, right?
No, sure, absolutely. So the two separate questions, let me just take both of them. Firstly, just coming to the GST kind of cut, right, and in terms of the impact on the ground on consumer durables. Now, one of the big durable segments has actually been kind of air conditioners and refrigerators, etc. These depend on a strong summer season, and the summer season has been weak. There is kind of channel inventory sitting on the ground. So I don't think GST cuts on its own is going to be enough to lead to an immediate recovery in the sector. But really, when you are looking at kind of companies, you aren't necessarily just looking at this quarter, the next quarter, but more in terms of the short to medium term kind of growth dynamics. And if you are kind of looking at the GST cuts in consumer durables, this has kind of clearly reduced the kind of price. The entry price for an AC would have reduced quite substantially. The same for TV, for fridge, etc. As kind of seasonal factors play out and demand starts to come back, this is clearly a big positive. And the moment you take the combination of GST cuts, interest rate cuts, and kind of money in hands of consumers, especially at the lower segments because of the income tax cuts, it lays a strong foundation for a growth recovery. I mentioned a second half because there currently are some kind of headwinds, and which is why the growth recovery may not be imminent. With regards to kind of auto, right now, this is something you kind of have to get a bit segment and kind of company specific. I think the segment we are the most concerned about is really two-wheelers. Now, out here, if you're just looking at what's happening in the market from a slightly longer term perspective, over the
Okay.
past few decades, it's been a two-player
Okay.
market.
Okay. Okay. All right, Ashi. Thank you so much for joining in today and giving us all those details and the fundamental outlook on the markets as well. With that, we'll slip into a short break. We'll get you excerpts of Rahul Joshi's interview with Union Minister Piyush Goyal. Stay tuned for that conversation.